Uh, Welcome to the Swedish Junior Hockey Podcast. Jacob Dahlin here, your host. Today we have Derick Gibson, who is with Mountain River Physical Therapy in the mountains of Virginia. Thank you for coming on the podcast. We're going to talk about some strength and conditioning and physio stuff today.
Yeah, thank you, Jacob. Absolutely, I'm excited.
Yeah, so in the background, we'll release this. We have an audio portion and we have a video portion that comes on YouTube, and we'll try them tied together. So you're in your home gym now.
Yeah. I thought it was appropriate to do a fitness podcast at my fitness layer. So
Yeah.
I thought this was cool.
We were joking offline a little bit about ripping some squats in the background, but maybe we'll do that in the teaser on the Instagram teaser for this podcast. So.
Absolutely.
You're better at doing it than I will. I can promise you that. So here's kind of what I wanted to talk about. You and I got together through my son's kind of going through this FMS process. His junior aspirations are, it's a test that they want him to do to identify kind of his mobility and stability and strength kind of components, or not the strength components. But so I started looking around and realized that the guys that started that was right up in your neck of the woods. And then I got in touch with my buddy Chris Kerr at Liberty, and he said, well, these are the two places that you should call, and you're one of them. And so that's kind of how we got together. Give us a little bit of background about you, and then kind of then we'll go into what you do, and then we'll go deep into an FMS specifically and how you train hockey players.
Yeah. So my background, so I went to Liberty University for my undergraduate degree. That's where Chris Kerr, we got to meet, and we were both in the exercise science program. And my initial interest was strength and conditioning. So I wanted to be a strength coach. I wanted that weight room atmosphere. But then I came to the clinic I'm at now for an internship, and I was like, this is really cool, where they take rehab, whether you're, a 65-year-old person learning to sit up and, stand up and sit down from a chair, or you're a college football player that's learning a box squat. They're kind of the same thing if we scale it, and so I thought that was a really cool place to be. But at the time, I didn't have all the necessary classes to go to PT school. So I actually went to physical therapist assistant school, which is a 2-year program. And so I did that first, and then worked a little bit, started my family, and then convinced my wife while we had children to go back to PT school for my DPT. So and I did that in Knoxville, Tennessee, in South College.
Okay.
So that's my journey to physio. And then from that point, I've been at Mountain River, which is at Functional Movement Systems headquarters. So Mountain River, our clinic is in Chatham, and then right across the street, the FMS headquarters. I mean, probably, I don't know, 15, 20 yards from the clinic is all the filming studio and everything they have for FMS. So there's a lot of collaboration. Gray and Lee are able to come in and out, and we're able to collaborate on things, and then, mentor us and keep us, up to date with everything they're doing with those things.
And I was about to ask that. So you guys are affiliated with that, or is that the physical therapy clinic, and then that's the side thing, or how does that work?
Yeah, so they are, I would say, their own separate entities, but we collaborate. So Gray had a relationship with the owner of Mountain River. His name is Bert Reed. So he's a physical therapist he got to connect with, and he really liked the stuff Gray was doing. So he got Bert to bring a clinic to Chatham, which is Gray's hometown. And so they were able to establish a PT clinic while also growing the FMS side of things. And it just worked out to be a beautiful relationship where, we try to deliver the best in physical therapy care to the community and others that want to come in to get that care, but also incorporating the FMS philosophy in what we do.
Yeah, and I need to give them a plug because I know they have their own podcast, and I've listened to a bunch of their episodes, and it's kind of entertaining. I'm originally from Sweden, but I came to the U.S. 1993, so I'm aging myself, in Chilhowie, Virginia. So it's not too far away from where I know you're from, Gretna.
Yeah.
and not too far away from Chatham. So when we were talking about FMS with Eric's guy who's up in Toronto, Canada,
Yeah.
and they were talking about FMS, and I didn't know anything about FMS. What the heck is FMS? And then I found out about, oh yeah, well, is the guys who started it are in Chatham, Virginia. So when was the first time, the small world, when was the first time that you got introduced to FMS, and how does that, okay, when you first started looking into that, what did that do to you?
Yeah, you know, to be honest, the FMS certification was my very first certification. So I was actually, I want to say a junior at Liberty, and I was still trying to figure out things. And there was we had a professor that actually left Liberty to go work at the Mountain River Clinic and get some mentorship from those guys. And he was able to recruit Liberty students that were interested in doing that kind of stuff. And so I went up and checked it out, and they're like, hey, if you're interested, you can get certified, and you just basically have to show up and do screens for, like, there's a basketball prep school that's in Chatham. So there's a lot of kids that go there for prep school, and then they go D1 after that usually. But there's a good talent pool and a good exposure to athletes, whether it's at Liberty or there. But so, yeah, I got a chance to get introduced to the system that way, and then really see how they use it with athletes and then the average person, the folks that walk in off the street, and how it could serve both populations. So yeah, that was my first certification and exposure. And then really it shaped how when I went to PT school, there's a lot of principles and philosophies that FMS uses that I still carry on to this day. And it makes more sense now that I've gone through graduate school. I have a deeper understanding. I always joke, I always talk about the Bruce Lee quote. It's like a punch was a punch, a kick was a kick kind of deal. And you kind of circle back through and, become simple again. That for me was the start of my journey, but it helps me, I think, treat so much better as a physical therapist.
So, and I forget, what's the prep or the JUCO there in Chatham?
Oh, you mean Hargrave Military
Hargrave,
Academy?
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I remember, not to go off too much of a side tangent, but because is that considered prep school, or is that considered junior college?
Well, so they do have
It's a military school, right?
It is. They'll have like your normal, I think up to like from 9th to 12th grade, but then they have that prep school for the postgraduates there that want to do the basketball program.
Yeah,
So
and also football. I mean, I know that there's a lot of D1 football athletes that come through there as well, right?
yeah, well, it was the football. They still have football, but not the prep program for football players. So that has since kind of phased out, and basketball is really their main push now, because
Okay.
they're winning a lot of championships. They're every coach that comes through there goes off and goes gets a college job. So it's kind of a you go check this box to go to the next level situation.
Yeah. All right. So you've been now in practice for a while. I think it's interesting to tie this in. So for those who don't know, Liberty University, been in Lynchburg forever, Christian school there, and their hockey program, which is kind of it's been, top-notch facilities. We're going up there tomorrow, as a matter of fact, and great coaches and plays in the ACHA D1. They probably could be NCAA if they wanted to, and have been running their programs like that. But Chris Kerr, talk about, so you and Chris graduated together.
Yeah, I got to meet Chris. It's funny, when I was going through that transition of, I wanted to, we were graduating, and I think Chris applied for, there was a strength and conditioning job, and someone was leaving, and him and a few other guys were applying for it. And I remember him getting it because he seemed so progressive and forward thinking compared to the other guys, which I kind of, meshed with and I liked. And that's when I kind of made my transition to Mountain River at that time as like a volunteer and a tech. I just wanted to be around those guys, and maybe I could get a little paid money to learn some of these things that they're doing.
Yeah.
So that was our connection then, and since then we've been able to cross paths. Since I've gone back to Chatham and Mountain River, or if I come back to Liberty, because I still stay involved with some of their things. And we have a professor, Jeff Lowe's. He has the Sport and Spine Institute in Lynchburg. He's I think his background is in hockey, but he's a chiropractor by trade.
Yeah.
So we've been able to collaborate there, and the strength and conditioning and rehab community is so well connected and small in Lynchburg that Chris and I always bump into each other. I mean, we try to schedule things where we come down like at a homecoming or something, and get some barbecue and talk shop. We always he's been down to the clinic actually. He's I have a current PT student that's in his clinical rotation that Chris is our connection. Chris said, "Hey, come on down to Shadow if you like it, come back." And that was a year ago, and the kid, David is his name. David came back, and he's doing fantastic. He's got a hockey background, so I've learned a lot more about hockey, from the sport aspect, hanging out with him. So,
well, let's use that as an example, because I think that, all right, you take because I think that the topic here about FMS, but it's really a tool in the grander topic of the how do you build a hockey athlete, right? And we spend so much time and energy talking about, and there's lots and lots of money in the sport about how do you gain an edge by having a better shot and a faster skating, or better skating stride and better edges and all that kind of stuff. But so much of that, what I'm realizing, and I wish I knew this early on, is if you can build your athlete first, they can become so much more able to do more in the game of hockey. So how do you and so much of it becomes this mumbled mess of preventative and reactive and performance all mixed up in one. But when I was talking to Chris about FMS, but let's go here. What is FMS? Let's go there. What is functional mobility system, or functional mobility screen was started there in Chatham. Let's go with the background of how of FMS.
Yeah. So the functional movement screen it's really a baseline of 7 tests that it really grades, it sets a quality standard for what is your movement for these tests, and in my opinion it's pretty simple, right? The bar is kind of low. If you can do these things, then you can go to the next level, or whatever, that. And to give you a little bit more about FMS, it's a system. The FMS or the functional movement screen is only one portion of this, so there is a selective functional movement assessment. That is more of the medical model that I use more often right now daily, just because I see a lot of people. More often than not, people come to me hurt. I rarely see folks when they're like, "Hey, I feel great. What can we do?" That's just, I want to see. I wish it was more of that, preventative medicine. But so I use that, and then the FMS for me as a clinician is, so if they pass the selective functional movement assessment, they go to the FMS screen, and if they can pass the screen as an everyday person, no pain and it's smooth, then for me that's good discharge criteria. I say, hey, you can deep squat, you can do a push-up, you can do a lunge, right? So I feel much more confident that I won't have to see you back here in 2 weeks or 6 months or whatever that is.
So you use that fairly regularly in your day-to-day process with general folks.
Absolutely. Whether you're, and we tailor it to the person, So I see post-surgical folks, will they do it day one? No, but in 6-8 months or whenever you become off of that, that surgical healing timeline that the surgeon wants you to go through, I'm going to probably take you through some of those aspects to make sure that, because it's a feedback system for me. Like if you pass that, I know I did a good job on your rehab. And if you didn't, then I need to do a little bit more shoring up those loose ends.
So let's go through them. The 7 movement patterns. I've got the website open here, which is and this is a PDF. It gave me if you Google functional movement screen, you'll find it right away. But the first one is deep squat. Second one, hurdle step, inline lunge, shoulder mobility, active straight leg race, trunk stability push up, and then rotary stability. Which so what is that? Those 7, it uses pretty much all of your body and all your body joints, right?
Right. It's it's comparable. It's a screen. It lets us know, and to give you a background, it's got a grading system, right? 3, you can do it. Nope, it's perfect, right? A 2, you can do it with compensation. A 1, you can't do it at all. And then a 0 is you have pain. And for me, if I'm coming at this from more of a fitness or strength and conditioning perspective, when I take you through this, I want to see, number one, do you have pain? Because if you have pain with any of these simple movements, then we don't even need to talk about training. We got to figure out why you're hurting. Um, and so it helps me identify that. The other piece is from an exercise prescription standpoint of, all right, you did these 7 movements. You didn't have pain, so that's great, but you had a few ones, right? So if you had a 1 on your deep squat, then maybe when I program some kind of squatting pattern movement, I'm going to do, I'm going to try to adjust that so that you don't get injured squatting. Because, the last thing I want you to do is get injured preparing to get better at your sport. So I think from that standpoint, it helps me better prescribe the exercises that you need. And then as we're modifying the exercises so you can squat or whatever that may be, we're working on how do I make your squat better so you pass this test at some point.
Yeah. So what's interesting about the timing here, of course, we're recording this beginning of July, but so we're on the eve of last week, we did the NHL draft. So during the draft combine, all the teams were having players in, and the FMS has been a part of the screens. They do a bunch of different tests, but the FMS is one that they give to everybody. Not sure who got that in, but it's kind of interesting that a couple of boys from Chatham, Virginia, come up with a process or a system that is now widely used, not just in NHL, but then it gets translated all over the world. But it doesn't take any equipment. It's easy to do. It's fast, and it gives you. It's not going to be the be all end all, but it is something that is, it's a component of the combine. Just like they do the assault bike, they do the number of push-ups and all that kind of stuff. And it gives you then a snapshot. It's not the MRI on every joint, but you can't do that with everybody universally. So here's a snapshot that you give. So let's say that you have now not a post-surgical patient, but you have the young athlete. So take my son who's 18, and we were talking about him earlier on, but let's use him as a guinea pig here. How do you, when you push him through and do an FMS, first of all, how long does it normally take? Half hour?
For just the screen itself?
Yeah.
10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's simple, right? You don't
Right.
need much equipment or any. Then you need a stick or something to hold on to or something.
Right.
So you can use a hockey stick if you want to use that, or any kind of 2x4 or whatever. So you go through this, and now you have a score. You're not going to use, or can you use that in comparison to a non-healthy athlete as well? Or are we talking too much apples and oranges?
Yeah. So, it's funny you mentioned that because my student, we were talking about, he has to do a service project. And one of the things he's interested in is doing the functional movement screen on some of the Liberty hockey players, right? And starting to establish, what does the movement profile look like for those hockey players? Do we and give you an idea, do we consistently see that their push-up is bad or their deep squat is bad? Is that a common theme? So, like you're saying at the combine that, hey, we're finding more hockey players have this issue. You can probably, I haven't seen your screen, but you probably want to make sure you're taking care of that, is kind of what he's coming from and he's interested in.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say, like, if your son comes in healthy, and there's no issues, because part of before I'm doing the screen is, a detailed history, right? We're getting to know each other. What's your background? When did you hit a growth spurt and all this stuff? And then, the screen helps me see how you move. What can we do? What's next steps, right? So I think at that point, as far as comparing him to someone that's injured, I would almost rather, just take the information from what it gives me for that specific person in front of me.
Yeah.
But I would like to compare it though. And I like this idea though, because my colleague and my mentor that I'm in the clinic with, Allison Howell, she just got back from the MLB combine. And so it's very similar to the NHL, right? They got a bunch of different tests, and the FMS is one of those things. And so they start to collect data and start to see, hey, here's a consistent theme we see with baseball guys. And I think the same thing can happen for hockey, right? And if we start at the highest levels and start to establish, here's things we see with the screen that show up, often, you can I can pull that data. And then when I screen your son, I can say, hey, he's falling right in line with where the pros are right now,
Yeah.
or he's below the standard of what we've seen when the pros go through this test. So,
So what are the common things, if there are things that you see just in general, and maybe we can then talk about hockey players. So what are the things that you often find when you're done with the screen? What
yeah.
are common problems, so to speak?
So I would say, and with the screen, and I like the word screen, it just kind of, it's almost like blood pressure, right? If I take your blood pressure and it's 140 over 90, I don't know if it's because you're anxious or, you got some other vascular issue going on. I need to do a deeper dive. So
Yes.
so the screen does, it's kind of very similar. Like it lets me know, hey, you can't do this. I don't know why you can't do it yet, but I need to dig deeper on those things. So, and I would say typically what I would see, now it varies population, I would say like, for instance, female volleyball players. I usually see rotary stability and a push-up are usually not very good, which are stability strength tests, right? But I still see like their flexibility is pretty good. Their shoulders move great, their leg raise looks good. We're not spending a lot of time stretching. We're doing more stuff that's stability based and building those things up versus let's just say a Hargrave running back, right? Or the basketball guys. Man, they have locked up ankles. Their leg raise is terrible, and their shoulders don't move real well. They're just bound up and stiff.
All right. So when you say stability,
Mm-hmm.
let's clarify what stability really means.
Okay. So for me, the way I would classify that, so I first say mobility is really just, do you have the available range, right? Can you lift your arm to the over your head? Can you touch your toes? Can you lift your legs up? The stability for me would be control of that range of motion, if that makes sense. So
Okay.
if you so and to give you a deeper dive, because that's where the selective functional movement assessment comes in for me often is, I will have someone that can't touch their toes, right? And then
I'll raise my hand.
right. So I do a fancy trick where I take them. It's called the toe touch progression. Chris may have introduced that to you at some
No.
point, but well, and maybe we will at some point. But I'll take them through this little party trick, and they can touch their toes, and they're like, "Wow, I'm so much more loose." And really, all I did was I created more stability through that through an exercise. If you were truly stiff and you had a lot of restricted motion, I'd have to do a lot more hands-on stuff. I couldn't just take you through something to open that up, right? Your nervous system and your brain are keeping you protected for some reason, right? And that's kind of a maybe a drastic case, but a stability focus that I'm looking to address on that.
So take the number 6 here, trunk stability push-up, which is
Uh-huh.
it's not a normal push-up. You normally have, so normally you push that right, you have it right in the area, like a normal push-up. But what you're doing is you're moving the arms forward. How far out typically?
So you will have it for like a guy like yourself. I'd have it about forehead here, and then you
Okay.
come out even with your shoulders, right? So the
Okay.
arms are a little bit more ahead of you, right? Because I want to see, can you organize your trunk when you do that push up from that position? Do I see a lag? Does your core get weak? Does your chest come up, then your hips, right? Or does it? Do I see you come as one uniform motion?
So the stability there is the uniform motion and smoothness of that motion.
Right, right. And again, I would say control of that motion. I can't tell from the screen. Can you not do the push up because your shoulders are stiff, or is it because you just lack the coordination and control, like getting your muscles to work in a uniform fashion to do the activity, or something else limiting you back? So I have to dive deeper to figure out which one of those things.
So this is going to be a cool little project here, because when Eric will do the FMS, I'm just going to do it parallel,
Oh
and
yeah.
we'll record both, and I'm sure we're going to have a big chuckle over that, because I can see, like, I'm 48, and I know my problems, but this is going to really exacerbate. It's going to really show them where they are. Well, that's really cool. So now you're completed with this. You identify So what do you do with the information? Now you identify some problem areas, like you're saying with the what was your example with the running back as an example? He has high what was his typically what you see there?
Yeah. So let's just say, I screened his leg raise and he had a 1, right? No pain. He just can't do it. And his shoulders, he doesn't move real well. And I see a 1. Now, the way the FMS is structured, like if you took a course, would be you want to try to improve the mobility stuff first that you can, right? And the shoulder mobility and the leg raise are two of those things. Because if your shoulders and your hips are moving a little bit better, I think that those are usually easier to grab in some instances. But if you follow that kind of treatment algorithm, we'll try to clear those things up. And that's also looking at everything else, right? Did he have pain with something else, right? Because I need to figure out why that's hurting. But if it's just the shoulders and his hips that are stiff, what I do then is we decide, and it depends on your skill set, right? If you're a strength coach, maybe you prescribe certain stretches and activities that open up those shoulders so that so they go from 1s to 2s or 2s to 3s. But I would just say, you don't have to shoot for the 3, but you could, just get them where the minimum threshold that you need to compete.
And what we're talking about here is assuming that there's not an injury.
Correct. Again, that's where I would say for me specifically, if you come in and I'm going to use the screen, I already know a lot about who you are, what sports you do, what you eat for breakfast. I know a lot about you so that I can make a better decision on the things I want to test with you along with the screen.
Yeah. So, and the other thing I'm really interested in is, and we just recorded with Joachim Tenander in Sweden about, how your body is made up, and your body is supposed to work in unison. When there's a reason why you have a bicep and a tricep, right?
Yeah,
And
right,
you
right.
don't just have a bicep. And if you have a twice proportionate bicep over your tricep, it's not going to work right. You're not going to have optimal performance. So you want both. You
Right,
want to have
absolutely.
a strong quad and a strong hamstring. You want to have a strong ab and a strong back. There's a pronation and supination, I guess, is if I remember back in anatomy and physiology back in the day, but it all works together. And I mean, if we're trying to build an athlete, you want to have proportionate strength, proportionate mobility, and stability.
Absolutely. Symmetry is how I would sum that up, right?
Yes, symmetry.
Or balance, right? There's a great book, Gray, that one of his first ones he's written, The Athletic Body in Balance, and it kind of discusses some of that. And I do this a lot in clinic. Is there a difference left versus right, or front to back, And if we can, and the screen helps us identify some of those things. Like if you have a leg raise, right? You can raise one leg higher than you can raise the other. Well, you got a 2 on one and a 1 on the other. That could be problematic depending on your sport. So maybe we need to clean that up, and that puts you at risk for other things.
All right, this brings up my next subject, and that is, or next where it leads into here, really interesting. So do you find a lot of people that are uninjured but have been training wrong, and then making things worse because they're continually to increase the gap between this muscle versus this muscle because of
Yeah.
how they work?
Yeah, I would say, like if we're dealing with like statistics, there's always outliers, right? There's always the guy that can train very poorly and still has great outcomes and still is a stellar performer. And then there's always, the people on the other end of the spectrum on those things. But I would say clinically, what I've seen is that, some of those folks end up having have an injury later on because of the things they keep, they compound the effect and eventually it catches up with them. And I like to sometimes I'll see that with young kids that you can pretty much do anything with a kid and they'll get stronger because they're growing, they're changing, they're adapting. I think it really matters, and I think it's really cool. Like if you have a high level athlete and you train them, you have to know what you're doing, because if you give them the wrong thing, it's going to make their performance suffer. Because at that level they're having to really train differently and do different things. But I will say as far as like injury side, and it's going to set them up for being hurt. I think some of the things like, let's just say they're training wrong. I think they put a limit on their potential. if that makes sense. So, maybe you're operating at 70% of what you could do, but if your, locked up ankle is still there, then the ceiling has been met, then you can't go any further for what activity you're wanting to do. But if you train a little different and capture some of those low hanging fruits, then your performance can probably go to another level.
Yeah. And I mean, I know that everybody wants to put on the plates and do, you know, big squats and put the chains on there and, and all that. But maybe, and then you got the guy over there that's just using the bands,
Right, right.
but they're doing a lot more, or, you know, which one is really the best training method, right? Um, and I guess, and here's the other thing that this leads into, and that is individual training versus group training. What's your thoughts on that?
I think you can do group training if you do it right. Like for instance, I was having this discussion because I do where I went to high school. I still try to do some things with the football team there because I was a former football player and I enjoy doing stuff for this community that I live in and grew up in. But one of the things we were able to look at and do is we did an FMS screen. So we screened all the folks, right, and we put it in some software and it spit out, okay, here's all our these folks have problems with these areas. So we were then able to give a group, say, hey, these guys all have leg raise problems, these guys all have push-up problems. So in a group sense, I made that group work on things together and has a little bit of a competitive atmosphere, right? They can, oh no, I can do this better, no, and so they kind of push each other and get going in the same atmospheres in this group, and so they work on those things in those smaller groups, and then when we come together for practice, right, there's a little bit more camaraderie, they've worked on their movement deficits, and they're playing better and they're more receptive to training.
Yeah, I think that that's really, really interesting, and I think, unfortunately, and I mean, I think high school athletics is similar here in the U.S., where you may not have resources, and especially you take football as an example, where you got lots and lots of players, and you have a lot more players than you do coaches, and you definitely have a lot less coaches that know what the heck they're doing.
Right, absolutely,
So
absolutely.
it's really, really, I mean, I can empathize as a coach, you know, it's really difficult to herd this group. And so the simpler, the better. But I think sometimes it's hard to kind of get the most efficiency or the most effectiveness out of an athlete when you do it that way. And I think that brings up the point of, I mean, in order to get ultimate performance, so much of it depends on that athlete themselves to be able to say, I know what my deficiencies are, and I'm going to, within this group setting or within this time period that we're going to be in the gym, I am going to focus on these things while we're doing all of this. Right.
Right, right. and,
It's
and I
not so
think
much, everybody's going to do exactly this, but allowing, and I think allowing some flexibility within the time frame within a group setting is important.
yeah, yeah, and I was just going to say that it's almost like in the pros. I think strength coaches now get, like, I don't know, 6 to 8 weeks to work with their athletes, or at least NFL wise is what I'm more familiar with. And um, so you think about, all right, man, it's a lot of change you're trying to do in 6 weeks. And a lot of these guys come in with their own trainer, their own background, their own thing they're doing. And so I think there's a lot of value in, unity. When everybody's kind of working together, there's a similar system involved so that everyone's communicating from, like, for me, for instance, if I am familiar with the screen and my football coach and the strength coach are familiar with the screen, we're all speaking the same language. So we don't have any issues. If he can't do something, the coach is very much aware of what those things and why it's important for us.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. So what's your opinion then on, I mean, FMS is widely used for the pros, and the Liberty guys are using it. Is it widely used across the board everywhere, or is it this unknown thing that people should take advantage of more?
Yeah, I would say, just to my knowledge, I know that, like I was telling you, the MLB, the Major League Baseball,
Yep.
is utilizing it. The NHL, I believe the NFL is doing stuff with that, and a few other leagues. Um, and I would say, and that's one of my tasks that I've put on myself for this community. Because when I grew up, FMS was getting going, and that was they were using it, but no one knew about it. I remember when I first went to the clinic, and you see all these pictures of these famous people that Gray's worked with, and I was like, "There's Peyton Manning," and I was like, "How come I didn't know that growing up?" My hometown and Gray's hometown are 15 minutes apart, right? We both have one stoplight, and it's a super small deal. So then I got to thinking, maybe I can be that beacon to serve this community with those tools, because and I like car examples, but like if the NASCAR guys, they're using all those pit crew stuff, I can bring it to the Ford Focus down here, right? And help those folks and really enhance, their quality of life, their movement, and their well-being. So I would say it depends on the area you go to, but I would say, it's more familiar in the pro and college settings as opposed to everyday clinic life and your normal PT clinics.
So what is going to be the 1-2 things that is going to be beneficial for that young athlete, the 18-year-old when they do the FMS? Is it going to be that self-actualization of knowing this is where you are, so now you can build from that, or what? How do you then use it?
Yeah. So if athletes coming in, I think one, if you let's just say kind of like you guys are planning on doing, video yourself going through the screen the very first time. Because if you really want to make change and you kind of realize, wow, I'm a high level hockey player, but I can't do a certain movement, film yourself going through it, and then in 6 to 8 weeks, find out whether it's a strength coach or a physio, whoever is making that recommendation, work on those things and come back and film yourself and watch the change. I think that's cool because it sets a baseline of test retest. I couldn't do these things before, but then I could do it after. And then you realize, I think it's a psychological boost too. Hey, I know this isn't a low hanging fruit for me, right? I know I can do these things. So I'm much more likely to be able to, whatever exercise coach is going to throw at me, I'll be ready for.
Yeah. And it's both from a prevention standpoint as well as optimization standpoint, right?
Right. And I will
Performance.
say, yeah,
Yeah.
performance. Yeah. Because I like it, because there's, I would say injury. I like the word, the phrase injury reduction. I just think it's hard to prevent injuries, right?
Yeah.
So for me, it's one of the tools I like to use. And you could talk to a bunch of different sports medicine guys, and they'll give you different things. But for me, it's such a valuable tool that I've seen, personally in the trenches. When certain people can't do certain things, they're more at risk for certain injuries. And I will say, just like I practice in physical therapy, there's a lot of special tests I use to determine if someone has a certain condition. But I don't use just one test. I use a cluster of tests to help guide my decision making. So the FMS is one component of a multitude of testing that I do for athletes.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be interesting to see because where's he going to be in the next 10 years? If we look back what it was 10 years ago, there was a lot of things that we didn't do. And 20 years ago, I remember when I was growing up and people were just start talking about, optimizing diet for performance. And we thought that was weird. And now, high school athletes are having specialized diets and it moves very, very quickly. So I'm sure that and then I think it's we could spend multiple podcast episodes talking about different things, cupping and dry needling and all kinds of different things that optimizes performance. But I think this is an important and a fairly easy. What struck me is I think that we got to be careful thinking that this is going to be the be all end all, which it isn't. But it gives you an easy way to do some things, to identify things that you can do something with. At the end of the day, if you don't do anything about it, you're wasting time. But if you're interested in optimizing performance, you want to have a little bit of a roadmap to work on, and knowing what is good for one person may not be good for another. We're all built differently. There's 5'5" people and there's 6'5" people, and I'm sure that they move very differently.
Absolutely.
So it's going to be fun to kind of. I'm interested in keeping this conversation. I'm gonna talk to Chris tomorrow actually, and pick his brain a little bit. Maybe I can get him on here too. He's such a shy guy.
But yeah, you know, he's humble, I guess is the word I would use. But
He is. He is. He's not a
he's
shy guy. For those who know
yeah.
Chris, but and Chris is a strength and conditioning guy for Liberty's D1 men's and women's, but just an awesome guy and lots of knowledge there, and brings a little bit. What I would like to have a discussion with him is going to be, all right, now how do you take this data that Derick provides? We've done the test. Now, how do you take this and how do you now use it with your group of players? That's what I would love to hear from him, specifically about hockey.
Yeah, and you know, I think that's a great point, because I think that's the chance, and that's why I love Chris so much, because you know, not only is he a Liberty guy, but you know, the communication lines are open, right? Because Chris may do a screen and then find out, you know what, this is a tough. Like, I think this is more medical. I'm going to send you to Derick, right? And then I see him, and we do whatever we got to do, get that pain off or get something opened up and get it, you know, moving better. Send them back to Chris. Chris knows better than anybody how to get them strong, how to keep them on the ice,
Yeah.
right? And if he can't, he knows to send them to me. And if I can't get somebody, or if I got them doing good and they're ready to get strong, I'm like, go see Chris, right? But
Yeah.
we have that collaboration, that kind of that mesh you were talking about at the beginning. I think that's what's missing, is collaboration between professionals, you know, where I don't want to be the end all be all. I want to work with, you know, people that want to work with me and want to, you know, do what's best for the client in front of us.
Yeah. Well, wrapping this up. So for those who want to know more about FMS, I mean, you can Google that and you can find the YouTube videos and the podcasts that they have that. But for you, what's the best way to get in touch with you and your clinic? And I'm sure you're open to, you know, people that have questions and say, hey, I may have this problem, but what's the best way? I know you're on LinkedIn. And
Yes.
you spell your name a little bit. It's not Dereck, but it's what's the best way to reach you?
Yeah. It's always the Derick, Derick, but I do that often. It always tells me I spell it wrong no matter what I'm typing it. But usually, so LinkedIn's one way to do it. But I'm also very active on my Instagram. That's at Derick Simpson. So DerickSimpson. You know, put some content on there that is more fitness, but mainly it's a lot of pictures of my kids. It's kind of a little living scrapbook for me, but there is some strength and conditioning, some physio related stuff that I like to put on there too. But it's also an easy way to communicate and reach out to me, because I love doing these chats like this to get deeper discussions and dives into some of these topics.
Yeah, awesome, and we'll make sure that we get you on the bar there with lots of plates, doing some squats, maybe some really fancy music in the background, and we'll push out this episode, and that'll be the teaser.
Yeah. I'll crank out some Metallica and put you know, 5 cookies on there or something.
That's right. Derick, thanks for jumping on. This is interesting. Hopefully people in Sweden, you know, 2/3 of the people, this podcast was built to educate and inform North American listeners of Swedish junior hockey. 2/3 of the people that are listening are from Sweden. But it's really, you know, all over the world when we look at the information on where they're coming from. But the universal thing is really people that are interested in hockey and people are interested in sports, and you know, hopefully people will get a nugget or two, and it's about challenging people to be thinking about, how do I build the athletic body that can perform the best way? And you know, we're going to be doing a series about mental fast thinking and fast mind, about how do you improve your mind and the hockey IQ side of it. But it's really that three-legged stool about the, you know, the on ice, the off ice, and then what goes in between your ears here too. So hopefully we can educate and inform in those areas and bring people together. So Derick, thanks for jumping on, and we'll stay in touch for sure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jacob. I appreciate it.